This week, we've selected Jono's helpful sketch that explores the meaning of the word biweekly and whether we should be using it at all.
If the meeting on Wednesday has been moved forward by 2 days, when is the meeting?
Things that get very confusing in my world are calendar dates, because we deal with America and Asia quite regularly. So when it's kind of like 5th of the 3rd, is that in a few days' time or is that May?
The typical Western way is that time is like this long timeline that's spread out in front of us. And there are some cultures where they say, well, you can see the past, but you can't see the future. So for them, the future's stretching out behind them.
But for that first week, we had a lot of vegetables to eat.
It meant twice a week, though.
It meant twice a week,
Yeah, yeah.
Hello, and welcome to Sketchplanations, the podcast. When the 10:29 train gets cancelled due to last-minute industrial action and you've time to kill before you know there's a fast and furious scrap to be had to secure a seat on the now guaranteed to be rammed next service to King's Cross Station in London in just over an hour's time, there are 3 options. Option 1, sulk, bemoan the bloomin' railways in Britain and let this unfortunate situation ruin the rest of your day. Option 2, go for a lovely walk around the historic city of York in the north of England and soak up some cultural and architectural wonderment spanning the ages. The Shambles, for example, is often referred to as the best preserved medieval street in Europe. Or option 3, find a cafe nearby, buy a coffee and settle in to start prepping the next episode of the podcast. And so here we are, listeners. All of us, here now, a community brought together through adversity, stronger than ever, defiant in our resolve to make lemonade. I'm Rob Bell, seasoned lemon picker, and joining me once again on our curious exploration of the world, always positive, always cheerful, our very own man from Del Monte, he who says yes to the best. It's Jono Hay. And perched up high in the trees on his continuous campaign of chaos, occasionally chucking fruit at passers-by. He's charismatic, he's cheeky, he's a little monkey, all right. It's Tom Pellereau. Hello, my friends. Are you well?
Hello.
Good evening.
Should get a hat like the man from Del Monte. No.
They were good ads, weren't they? I watched some of those back on YouTube, writing that, just for fun. Just to see, because I got confused between the man who likes to say yes and the bank that likes to say yes, because that was like Midland Bank, wasn't it?
I don't know. Was it the man from Del Monte likes to say yes or something?
Yeah. And he'd go around.
He'd taste the juice.
Yeah, he'd go off flying around in his cool little planes and helicopters and land in the most remote parts of the world where they're growing the fruit. And I don't know if he ever actually said yes or if it was just a knowing nod.
Yeah.
It was very much a non-speaking role for the actor.
Yeah.
It worked in all languages.
Which typically you don't get paid as much for, but,
Yeah.
they had to get him back each time. He was the man from Del Monte. How are you at dealing with delays to your journeys, boys? That is genuinely what happened to me recently.
If I'm in the right place, I don't mind a delay. It feels a bit like... It depends. It all depends, doesn't it? It all depends. If you really want to get back, it's a pain. But if you're a bit relaxed about when you get somewhere, I don't mind it. It feels a bit like bonus time. But
Yeah, a bit of free time. It depends on the length of the trip that you've got coming up, maybe, like the length of the journey. As you say, what's on the other end? Are you on your own, or have you got family or dependents around you as well?
not long ago, I was in Minneapolis and my flight got completely cancelled and there was no way to get around, and so I stayed the night and went to the largest mall in America by myself.
That's not bad, is it?
It was probably all night as well.
It was all right. Yeah.
That's not a bad experience that you wouldn't have had. Now you can say that. I've been to was it the largest mall in America?
I think it's called the Mall of America.
Oh, the Mall of America. Yeah, great. Yeah. Would you say that's the best delay you've ever had?
I hope not.
It's hard to think, isn't it? It's hard to think about
a good delay.
A good delay.
It was pretty good because I couldn't go the normal route, and so I had to go via Texas and then dropped in on a good friend.
Yes.
So that was amazing. Yeah,
That's
that
good.
probably was the best delay I've ever had. Yeah. Although once they offered us the money to fly the next day, you know that one when they've overbooked a flight?
Yeah.
And I'm never in a position to take it. But once we were like, actually,
Well, I'll take it.
we could just take it. Yeah.
Well, I got my money back for that journey at the weekend. So, and I was quite fine. I mean, I did have to stand all the way home because, you know, if one train gets delayed, the next 2, 3 are absolutely ram-a-lam-a-jam-dam.
Which journey at the weekend?
From York to London on the train.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And, yes, there's all genuine experiences on this podcast.
I thought it was a fictional example.
At the beginning of the story, when you said the 10:29, I was like, "What? Who's commuting at 10:29?" Like,
Well, yeah, so it was a
okay,
weekend
come
trip.
back
It was a
from
weekend
York.
trip. Yeah. I given the option, pay for the journey and sit in a standard seat for 2.5 hours, or stand and get your money back. I'll quite happily get the journey for free and stand. I ended up watching the rugby on my phone the whole way, and I was very happy. Well, happy. I was entertained.
Mid-happy.
Yeah.
You find yourself driving towards the edge. I find when I watch rugby, I kind of create this permanent slight lean in the direction that my team are going. Like I'm sort of forcing them. Like I'm almost in a scrum, kind of
Willing them forward.
Come on, like, this way. The second half, going the other way.
I used to find that with football, like just doing like the odd little nod when you head it. Go on, head it. Go on. Yeah, I'll tell you what. I was left feeling quite smug about the fact that I made good use of my time. I had about an hour and 10 minutes because I'm not that good at squeezing in productivity into a short amount of time. Despite having 2 very good friends who are very, very good at that. That influence hasn't rubbed off on me as much as I'd like. I was referring to you 2, by the way.
That's very nice
Thank
of you.
you. What? So you said it. So on the weekend, I was flying back from half term, and our flight got delayed and a bit more delayed, and I was just going through my emails from the week, and I was kind of like, well, I'll just keep doing this till we take off, and it just kept on being delayed. And I was like, just going through more and more. I was like, oh, I wasn't expecting to do 4 hours worth of emails here when we arrived at the airport. But by the time we took off, and then I'd worked on the plane. By the time we landed, it's like, oh, brilliant. Well, that's done. And as you say, though, travelling with family, I must say, iPads and that kind of stuff have completely changed it. Because when we were young, delayed for a plane, the kids have got nothing to do, they're running around a small airport causing chaos. Our kids were just so happy because they downloaded some things on Netflix and they were just happily sitting there watching that. It's like
Great.
their best time ever.
Yeah.
I remember sleeping at a Greek airport as a kid and just doing like word searches and logic puzzles for hours and hours on the floor of a Greek airport. But yeah, well, maybe I got quite good at word searches.
It was the iPad of its day.
You did.
Word search books with the iPad of their day. Well, listen, there are no delays here. This podcast service continues its 100% reliability record. There was that one time I temporarily uploaded an episode with Jono's track muted, and the time I forgot to hit report, and that time I forgot to hit record. So, I don't know, let's call it an even 90% reliability record. That's still not bad. Right then, all aboard. Let's podcast.
For what's worth, I didn't realise you were talking at the beginning about a specific trip that you'd actually had. I don't know if I switched off for a second or what, but I thought it was just a fictional trip that you might want to go to the shambles.
Yeah.
So that's why I was a bit confused.
It was
But
lovely.
yeah,
I was sat in York train station writing that, and it felt quite good. That was the inspiration for this week's introduction.
Yeah, you were very productive.
Yeah, it was.
These
That's why
live
I've
events.
come away feel really smug. This week, we've picked Jono's helpful sketch that explores the meaning of the word biweekly and whether we should be using it at all, because there's definitely room for ambiguity here, the consequences of which could be huge. You should be able to see this sketch on your podcast player screens now, but if not, you can find a direct link to it in the episode description down below. You can also find our email address there to send us stories of your own experiences and thoughts about the topics we cover. To save you time now, though, Tom will tell you where to send your emails.
hello@sketchplanations.com.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you for all your messages from the last week. We'll be going through a selection of those at the end of the podcast. Now, before we get going in earnest on this week's sketch, I have an important announcement to make. This week's sketch was chosen for a very good reason, in that it helps us explain that from the next episode, we'll be releasing this podcast bi-weekly. Now, to clarify that, I mean we'll be releasing them once every 2 weeks, or fortnightly.
Dear, oh dear. I need to redo the sketch.
As a team, with all the stuff that we've got going on, we figured we'd be better placed to keep bringing you the quality of podcast you deserve by reducing the frequency of publication, for the short term at least. And when we talked about it, we listed at least 10 reasons why we think it's a better offering. And I won't bore you with that list now, but suffice to say, in our current situation, and for the time being, we'll be publishing new podcast episodes every 2 weeks. There. That's sorted. Okay, on to the sketch, Jono. Why did you want to make this clarification? And was there something specific that happened to you that highlighted this discrepancy?
Yeah, I don't know. This sketch it's one of the things I like about actually doing sketchplanations, because I feel like, I don't know, a lot of things feel like maybe they need to be big ideas for your career or make you look at something differently or whatever.
Yeah.
But sometimes it could just be a little thing that actually you might find that you use on a regular basis in the future. And so it's like, here's something that I actually find quite useful. And I find myself telling people, whether they keep listening, I don't know. But
Sketchplanations, the podcast. We're here to help.
Yeah, so this came literally from writing and trying to explain in a very short space of time. So I've worked in web design for a long time, and so you're always trying to keep text as small and concise as possible, because basically people don't read text if it's on a website. But sometimes it's quite important. And so when I was at a company called Nutmeg, and we were just starting out, it was an investment company, and you put when people paid money in to be invested, we would do it bi-weekly. And It came back very clearly that people had different ideas of what our bi-weekly investing cycle meant. And people were quite annoyed if they'd waited a week and it hadn't happened, because we meant it was every 2 weeks instead of twice a week. And it turns out, if you go look up bi-weekly, it is actually in the definition that it can mean either of these two things. And the same is true of bi-monthly and biannually. I was actually on holiday one place and I had a biannual festival, and it never specified whether that was twice a year or every 2 years. And I'm still not sure to this day. Anyway, so we were writing this thing, and then it was a chap we were working with called Ian Hollingshead, and he's a writer himself, and he said, "Why don't you use fortnightly? It's a really nice word. It gets rid of all the ambiguity of bi-weekly," and I use fortnightly every time since. He, by the way, has written some really nice books of their collections of people's letters to the Telegraph newspaper.
Okay.
And they've got cool titles like "Imagine My Surprise."
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
"Am I alone in thinking?" Just as you might title these letters. They're quite fun. They're very funny books, actually. Anyway, so this tip is just has bi-weekly can actually mean twice a week or every 2 weeks, but if you just use fortnightly, there's no ambiguity.
So I have an example also of when this didn't go as planned for me with vegetable delivery to the house. So on the order form, there was a bi-weekly option. And what we wanted was a delivery once every 2 weeks, which probably makes sense. It's two of us in the house. And I have to say, I admit I did complete the form quite quickly without paying too much attention to the other options. But for that first week, we had a lot of vegetables to eat.
Did it mean it meant twice a week? Then?
It meant twice a week.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And I think if I paid more attention, we sorted it out after two. After two came within the same week, and we're expecting one, another 2 weeks, another one.
Did you send them the sketch?
No.
They need to know.
They need to know.
It's all these unhappy customers, terrible reviews.
I think if I'd paid a bit more attention, I would have seen that the options either side of it, maybe put it in context.
But that's where I started. People don't pay attention.
You're right, John. I am people.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So what we wanted actually was something a bit more akin to bi-monthly, as in twice a month or roughly once every 2 weeks. But then there's a risk of getting delivery once every 2 months. Not enough veg. So same, not enough, too much. What we want is somewhere in between. We want the mummy bear porridge.
So technically, bi-weekly and bi-monthly could mean the same.
Well, yeah. Two different people could mean the same thing and use those two.
One call it bi-weekly, one call it bi-monthly, and you get the same amount of veg.
Do you see the problem, listeners?
Yeah. And then, hilariously, thinking the more you keep saying fortnightly, I know that my 12-year-old would be like, "Oh, is that the game? Does that mean I can play Fortnite?"
Yeah, when he listens to this, his ears going to pick
the
up.
verb to play Fortnite.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually, I searched. Actually, I'd not thought about it really for the etymology for it, and all I could find was references to the game Fortnite.
Yeah, really. Yeah. So what?
Yeah.
So if it said I want to order my vegetables fortnightly, it means I have to go out and kill other people.
An online
in order to get
massive multiplayer competition.
Yeah, for anybody who doesn't know, Fortnite is a massive multiplayer online game where it's survival of the fittest, right? Survival of the winner.
Yeah. Survival of the person who's played the most.
Yeah, probably.
It means 14 nights, by the way. Which just seems completely obvious now that I looked it up.
What, fortnightly?
Is like a contraction of 14nightly.
Gotcha.
Yeah. There you go.
Oh, that's good. Oh yeah, I hadn't put two and two together with that.
So I was trying to think if you were like, if you want to say twice a year, you'd need like a Sixmas or something.
Yeah.
Every Sixmas. Yeah, for 6 months. I don't know.
Is mass month?
Well, it isn't. No. Meses month in Spanish. It sort of sounds like it, though, doesn't it?
Yeah. Okay, we'll go Sixmas.
It sounds very similar to Christmas twice a year.
A Sixmasly festival.
Yeah. Sixmasly.
Tommy, have you had any examples of when you've come a cropper because of bi-weekly, bi-monthly, biannually?
So the other day, walking along with the kids, we had the laugh about duck. Duck! And where?
Good.
That comedy sketch of duck because you're going to get hit by a branch, and the guy actually looks up and looks at a duck up in the air and gets smacked. Which comes up a bit. Things that get very confusing in my world are calendar dates, because we deal with America and Asia quite regularly. So when it's kind of like 5th of the 3rd, it's like, is that in a few days' time, or is that May? And so I'm always very clear to make sure it's like 5th March or 3 May, because that causes chaos.
Absolutely. This is all in the same realm. This is ambiguity around time, right? How we're describing time.
Yeah, and information baffling.
So I mean, where this took me when I was thinking and enjoying researching around this was around the ambiguity of language.
Yeah,
that we have as a kind of wider context, and there's quite a bit, and I've discovered that there are basically two types of ambiguity in language. There's lexical ambiguity, which is the presence of two or more possible meanings within a single word, like with biweekly. And there's syntactic ambiguity, which is the presence of two or more meanings within a single sentence or a sequence of words. So, Tommy, so in the example of I saw her duck, did she duck, or was she walking around with a duck? That's lexical ambiguity, as you say, and an example of syntactic ambiguity. This one's really good. This one's been pointed out in William Empson. So this one's been pointed out in William Empson's book, The 7 Types of Ambiguity, from 1947. And the phrase is, "I can't tell you how much I enjoyed meeting your husband." I can't tell you how much I enjoyed meeting your husband.
Yeah.
2 meanings? I can't tell you. Let me give you another one.
I'm struggling with that. What? Just because. What? No, because you can't tell you.
So you could take that as the way we probably all took it. I can't tell you how much.
Like you really did. You really did, didn't you?
Well, I can't tell you how much I enjoyed meeting your husband.
You just literally can't tell you.
Yeah, maybe I haven't met them, or I can't.
They told me not to tell you.
Yeah, 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 exactly. Yeah.
Don't tell my wife how much you enjoyed meeting me.
There's a slightly more fun one. A quote from Rowan Atkinson, and I presume is the introduction in a speech. So Rowan says, Rowan is a famous comedian, British comedian. He's Mr. Bean, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
So he says, "As I was leaving this morning, I said to myself, the last thing you must do is forget your speech. And sure enough, as I left the house this morning, the last thing I did was to forget my speech."
That's good.
So it is, and I guess ambiguity of language is a great source of wordplay and a great source of comedy as well, right?
Yeah, there's a few other sketches on that kind of thing. I don't know if you came across them.
Sketchplanation sketches.
Yeah. Yeah, there's quite a few. Well, actually, maybe just before I go on that, because when I sent out the fortnightly one, a couple of people wrote to me about some research that I really like. And I came across in the early 2000s by Lera Boroditsky. I think I might have mentioned it before, but it's such a classic example here, which is this ambiguity in time. And the classic example is if the meeting on Wednesday has been moved forward by 2 days, when is the meeting?
Oh, good. It's been moved forward. So there, I would say the meeting would be on Monday.
Yeah, interesting. And it's split. So some people will say the meeting is moved forward to Monday, and some people will think that it's now Friday.
Yeah, forward in time. Yeah,
exactly. And so it's ambiguous, and there's some really fascinating things about how we see time. So, for example, the typical Western way of talking about time is that time is like this long timeline that's spread out in front of us.
Yeah.
And so the future is ahead of us, as we would say, and the past is behind us.
Yes.
But that's not true for every culture. And there are some cultures where they say, well, you can see the past, but you can't see the future. So for them, the future's stretching out behind them, but the past is in front of them because that's what they can see. You can see.
Fair enough. It's logical. There's logic to that.
Yeah, and so it's just really fascinating ways that, like, actually, we don't all see these things the same way.
Wow, that I'm trying to get my head around that. That takes quite a bit of conscious effort to think about the past in front of you and the future behind you. Yeah, I even had to think about saying that as I said it.
Yeah, no, it's a kind of crazy one. And there was a great example also. She talks about there's an Aboriginal tribe who don't have words. They wouldn't use words for left and right, and so they do everything by like the cardinal directions, the compass directions, essentially. So everything's north, south, east, and west. And so whichever way you're facing, you always know which it is. And so she gives an example. You'd literally say, "Oh, look, there's an ant on your southwest leg."
Huh.
Or can you pass me the salt on your northeast?
But does that mean that you're constantly aware of where north, south, east, and west is?
Yes.
From the
so they're always paying attention whichever way they're facing. And apparently the way you greet each other there is you say hello and you say which direction you're heading in. That's kind of how you say hello. And for them, time doesn't stretch forward or backwards, it goes east-west. So just really like slightly mind-blowing things. You can't see Rob, but I've never seen his eyes quite so wide. He's lost for words and his eyes are wide. Yeah, it's just so yeah. I mean, you should check out. She does a really good TED talk about how language shapes how we think, which is really good. Tons of good stuff in it.
Yeah, well, I mean, just on that, when in terms of body language and what you give away when you're thinking or communicating, I'm riffing this a little bit. Isn't it that if we are recalling something from the past, then we'll look to our left, i.e. for us, kind of back on the timeline, because that timeline you talked about in our Western culture, Jono, I think for me that definitely is left to right as time progresses. So if you are recalling something, I think you tend to look to your left. Your eyeballs do. And if you're
a direction that they will look,
but then if
left.
So, but I think this is sometimes used to determine whether somebody's lying or not.
Yeah.
But then if you're asked a question, I don't know, where were you last Thursday? Oh, I was here at home. Or where were you last Thursday? Oh, now I'm looking the other way for the.
I'm making it up.
For those taking this
listening
audibly, looking forwards. Yeah, I'm making it up. I'm looking to some creative space, and I think that, well, for me, that lines up with what you were talking about there, Jono, with how we think about time and how we react within our conditioning of how we think and perceive time.
It's cool. I'm gonna ask people about questions about time and check which way they look now. I'm quite intrigued.
You liar!
You didn't have a coffee.
No, I was just looking that way because that's where the coffee is.
Yeah, that's good. Anyway, so that was I just thought it was so fascinating because a couple of people sent me this about this ambiguity of time being forward or backwards. And biweekly and fortnightly, but it's really cool. Or left or right, east and west. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, so when I was looking at the kind of comedic values or things that have unintentionally become quite funny, within that syntactic ambiguity, i.e. sentences or phrases having different meanings, headlines, it appears, often have this ambiguity, and I'll give you some examples of headlines. Kids make nutritious snacks. Right? Mother helps dog bite victim. Mother helps dog bite victim. And there's another one which I don't know whether we'll keep it in or not. Prostitutes appeal to the Pope.
It's very good. Do you know what? I've heard of those sort of things before. Did you come across what they're called?
Well, I found them as part of unintended humorous examples of syntactic ambiguity.
So I learned that they're called, and I keep meaning to do a sketch of it, which is they're called garden path sentences.
Oh no, I didn't see that at all. Oh, okay, brilliant.
Because you're leading someone one way with the sentence,
yes,
and then it trips you up and it goes the other way.
Brilliant.
Because I found a couple which was like, because he always jogs a mile, seems a short distance to him.
Because he always jogs a mile seems a short distance to him. Because he
always
jogs a mile.
I had another one which was it was actually a joke I saw a comedian do, which was, when he got older, my grandmother used to put butter on my granddad's back. After that, he went downhill very fast.
Yeah, brilliant.
But I just remember, like, that beginning bit, I thought it was pretty good. When he got older, my grandmother, and you're like, what?
What?
Yeah. He had a few others. He was the one he did the, do you know what it's a nasty bee to get stung by? The hepatitis B. Yeah. There were ones like missing lion remains found.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, quite confusing, like where you could interpret them both different ways. There was the old man, the boats.
The old man, the boats. The old man, the boats. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're called garden path sentences, where you're like, oh yeah, you go one way and then it trips you and you go the other ways.
Which is a whole genre of comedy, right? It's like one-liner comedy is all about that, taking your audience one way and then giving the old flipperoonie at the end. You know, it's a whole...
People would do it a lot better than I can.
No, it was good. I really enjoyed those. I really enjoyed those. So I what else? What did I find? I found some research around... okay, so there's a study by Ricard Sol and Luis Sion of the Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona. So excuse my pronunciation of those names. But it suggested that ambiguity is an essential part of how language works. Right, so if every single... So in this paper, it suggested that if every single object and concept had a unique word for it, it would be very easy for the listener to understand what was going on without any confusion. But it's quite difficult for the speaker to construct that sentence because there'd be such this enorm of vocabulary, right? But if on the flip side, if there are only a few words to describe everything, then speaking would be really simple, right? You know what you mean. You say the few words that you've got to do that. But understanding it would be very difficult and possibly fraught with danger, right? And so in this academic paper, it was deemed that in language, in modern languages, we've got it just about right between too many and too few words, and that the ambiguity allows for creativity and individual interpretation of stuff, like in poetry, and as we've been talking about there, the garden path with comedy as well. I thought that was quite an interesting view on it. Again, we've not got too many, we've not got too few, we've got it mummy bear's porridge just right.
Yeah, that's really good. And where that doesn't necessarily apply was like legal language, and one of the sketches I've done was on the Oxford comma, so I think we might have touched on. Do you remember that? So Oxford comma is like if you have three.
Because I was on mute then. No, we haven't touched on that, but I learnt about it through the sketchplanation, and I'm not entirely sure I fully understand it, but I use it. Carry on, Jono. Let's explore that.
Yeah, so it's basically if you've got a set of items in a list, it's whether or not you have a comma after the second to last item in the list. And the classic example is like if you have a dedication on a book, which is to my parents, Lady Gaga, and God.
Yes.
And without a comma, it's slightly ambiguous as to whether your parents are Lady Gaga and God.
Yeah.
Or is this a list of three things? Your parent, I'd like to dedicate this to my parents, to Lady Gaga, and to God.
Yeah.
And there's that classic book you've seen, which is Eat, Shoots and Leaves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is, an example of the Oxford comma. But there was this fascinating legal case for a company in Maine, and in their contract they had this line, like long line, saying the canning, processing, preserving, freezing, drying, marketing, storing, packing for shipment or distribution of, and then carried on. And they ended up having to pay $5 million because there was ambiguity over whether packing for shipment was its own thing or whether it was packing for shipment or distribution, whether that was one thing by itself or whether they were two separate things, packing for shipment and distribution.
Yeah.
And I think it applied to overtime pay. And so this ambiguity in a comment, well, maybe you could interpret it this way. There was a super episode of Malcolm Gladwell's podcast Revisionist History, which talked about the use of or absence of an Oxford comma in the American Constitution.
Oh.
And how it might determine like the formation of states and what you could do. It was basically like whether or not you can divide or add new states from within a state, and it's sort of ambiguous based on the placement of a comma or not as to whether or not you can. So it's just really fascinating how like even Like, you're right, and I think it's a good point. Actually, it's really helpful that language is ambiguous sometimes, but sometimes you want to be really precise.
That's amazing with something like the American Constitution, which is handwritten, right, on like big parchment paper, right, with quill pens. You know, a comma, that could just be a misplaced comma. Could actually be just a little bit of ink or a fleck that's got on there and got ground into
Just
the paper.
typo. Sorry, don't worry about that.
It could be.
Yeah.
But the implications of it are absolutely massive. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, Oxford comes interesting.
Tommy, I appreciate this is slightly more difficult for you as someone who's dyslexic. But do you get involved in the legal stuff? I mean, because there must be loads of legal stuff that comes through you or requires sign off from somebody. I won't read legal documentation most of the time because I just know that I can't understand it. I can't understand it. But it kind of dawns on me that you might have to get stuck into it sometimes. Or have you got people who do that?
I do. And ultimately, I'm usually the one who has to do the final read and sign them. And we are working with some of the world's biggest retailers who can have the most enormous legal documents that we then have to sign off on. Yeah. And it, as you say, often you read a sentence and you read it and you reread it and you're like, because quite often they have paragraph sentences with like no punctuation at all in this entire thing. And you're like, what does this mean? But for us, usually there's only actually 3 or 4 paragraphs that are actually important, and you just reread and reread them, and it sort of does make a bit of sense. But usually there's potential of, is this going to go this way or the other way?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, when you get so precise that you sort of need a translation to understand it, which I guess is true for many things. It's like, in a scientific paper or a mathematics paper, you have to be precise, but as a result, most people don't really bother to make the effort to learn it all. And the same is true with legal stuff, isn't it? You want to go, okay, well, what does clause 13 really mean? What does it mean to me?
Yeah, well, so this is interesting. So there's another category of ambiguity in language that I didn't mention earlier, which is pragmatic ambiguity, which is kind of what we're talking about here, right? It's where the understanding of a word or phrase is based on the reality or the practicality of the context.
Yes.
Okay, which I guess a lot of the time in legal terminology, a lot of it hopefully is defined more by the context of what's going on around it, but not always, and probably could be held to account in a court of law for to be taken out of context, like as you say with the canning factory, within the context that you could probably argue it from a practical perspective, whichever it was, but then from a non-pragmatic perspective and looking purely at the words and the comma or lack of, it could be argued some different way. So context is obviously really, really important with the language that we use.
Yeah, there's a really nice sketch. Basically, context is king, and it's just on this great example I saw in a research paper. And you might have seen it. It's quite difficult to explain in a podcast, but basically it has A, B, C, and 12, 13, 14.
Oh, I remember
one on
this.
top of each other, and if you look twice, the B is exactly the same as the 13, like literally exactly the same, like I copied them. But you read them A, B, C, and you read them 12, 13, 14.
Brilliant.
And all of it is just context. You just like that's a 13, or that's a B, like without even missing a beat. And so we take context to everything that we're trying to interpret. But I guess you want to be careful if you're a lawyer.
Yeah, and I guess there's a difference here between formal and informal communication, right? So it's very easy because we can see each other and we can hear each other in this conversation, that hopefully our context is very well understood amongst all three of us, and hopefully by our listeners as well, who aren't necessarily seeing us, although you can watch extended versions of each episode up on YouTube. Because within language, in the way that we're communicating here now, we've got 3 major components to it, right? We've got our body language that we can see. We've got our tone of voice as well, including emphasis on different words, and there's the content of the words themselves. So together, hopefully, we can all understand what we're saying to each other very clearly.
I always remember I was briefly at school in New York State, and our teacher there, Mr. Schnell.
I remember Mr. Schnell. We've done Mr. Schnell.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Would he put the stress on the wrong syllable?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I was quite stressed out for a bit. Yeah. But obviously, if you're listening, you don't have the body language, so it's difficult.
Yeah, exactly. Like a couple of examples between that context. Sat at a table. Oh, can you pass the salt? As opposed to, are you able to pass the salt? Actually, that's not really good. That's not a great example, but I'm going to move that one. So an example of this kind of pragmatic ambiguity. The cops are coming. And I tried to say that as flat as I could, right? That could be understood as a really good thing or a really bad thing, depending on what the situation was and your position within that whole scenario. The cops are coming! Like, leg it. Or, phew, the cops are coming.
It's true.
Yeah, but then with emphasis, Jono, going back to Mr. Schnell, is it Schnell?
Mr. Schnell.
Yeah, brilliant. In spoken language, emphasis brings a lot of meaning to a sentence. So here's the sentence: I never said she stole my money. Right? So many different meanings. I never said she stole my money. 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 Each read has a different meaning.
Yeah, there's tons. I was thinking context because I've got a sketch on Capitonym. You say about like most of the times you have the context, and it's funny because kids often don't have the context.
Okay.
And at the very bottom of our road where I grew up, there's it's a building, and on it says Polish Club. And for years I wondered what the Polish Club was, because it was in all caps. And it turns out it's an example of a capitonym, which is a word which changes meaning when it's a capital or not.
Yeah.
And so, of course, it was a Polish club. But as a kid, I apparently didn't have that context, and I was just baffled for quite a long time. And obviously, there's some really obvious ones like Turkey, where normally, because of the context, you assume, pass me the turkey. You don't assume people are talking about the country. There's a lot of them which are playing. China, right? There's another one. August is another word like that. Lent. Tom, did you say, are we in Lent now? But when you talk about Lent, that you're either talking about Lent or you lent somebody something. March is another one. So these are all capitonyms where obviously we use context. Rob?
Yeah.
Rob, yeah. Yeah. When I say Rob, Tom and I are discussing on the podcast, I don't mean that we're robbing Tom. I literally never interpreted it that way. Yeah. But technically, minus context, you might have done that.
So I was going to flip it slightly, and instead of talking about the ambiguity of language, I was going to talk about that one of the extremes of that academic paper I was talking about earlier, of having lots and lots and lots of words, a word for absolutely everything. So I don't know if you've heard this before, but the Inuit language famously has many words for different types of snow, right?
Yeah.
Interestingly, Hawaiian language doesn't distinguish between snow and ice. I mean, they probably don't really have to deal with that, the nuances of that cold weather too often. But do you know which language supposedly has the most words for types of snow?
No.
Right.
Russian.
In at 5, it's Swedish with 25. In at 4, it's Icelandic with 46. The Inuit language has somewhere between 40 and 70 words for snow. The Sami language, northern Scandinavia or Russia. Tommy,
They were
so you're about
they were
there.
the Kaffeekocks, weren't they?
They were the Coffeecocks,
Yeah.
exactly. They've got around 180 words for snow, but in at one, Scottish. 421 words, apparently, they have for different types of snow, including gems such as fiefel, which is swirling snow, flindrikin, a brief snow shower, and spitters, small flakes of wind-driven snow.
That's good.
Fiefel, flindrikin, and spitters.
I'd like to just come back in and say, how is it outside? Oh, it's Fintrikin out there. And they'd know exactly what I meant.
How many words for snow?
If there
have you
was
got, Tommy?
Scottish, they wouldn't understand what you're talking about anyway, half the time, probably. Or you wouldn't understand what they were saying,
This is
rather.
possible.
I mean, I've got it snowing. That's it. It's quite wet snow.
Wet snow, drop.
Well, they're big
champagne,
flakes, big snowflakes, big
flakes.
chunky snow. I think I'm
snow.
scraping the barrel now. Yeah, hard snow. Yeah.
Neve. That's a type of snow, isn't it? That's when snow
Neve?
compacts before it becomes ice. I think that's the process of when a glacier forms. It's snow on snow on snow, and then it neve, and then it's ice underneath it, I think.
Oh, nice.
Remember that from
So I'm
geography?
imagining the Hawaiians don't have a word for that either. For neve.
No. But they've probably got a lot of words for sand. Surf. They've probably got a lot of words for waves. In
Yeah,
Hawaii,
I bet they do. I bet they do. Whereas again, I've got big and small. That's it for waves.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Like you don't have to go to different languages, just in different cultures, right?
Yeah.
not even cultures, just groups of people.
Yeah.
Like
Dialects.
Like, of course, if you're surfing waves, you can't just call it a wave.
Yeah.
So there's a really good wave out there today. Like there might be a type of wave, but there might be some distinction to it. I was just reading a book with a 11-year-old, and it was Lego, and it had all sorts of different ways you might describe your Lego builds. Which, if you're spending all your days building Lego, you might come up with all these different ways of describing them.
Well, if you're really into your music, people will. Music journalists and real musos, they'll have loads of words that they can use, that they have at their fingertips to be able to describe music. Whereas somebody who's not necessarily that interested in music might enjoy music, but not necessarily that interested in it. It's loud, it's
Quiet.
got a good beat. I'm thinking about music.
You're not a music journalist, are you?
And a word that really amuses me, which you can be used in this context and seemingly all contexts, is there's quite literally a million words for that. And I'm not sure that anyone I know really knows the meaning of literally anymore, because it's literally used in every literal sentence. And I don't know if it was seems like it's part of our culture almost. I don't know if Friends, it feels like it was that kind of era, that Joey or someone, or in that program, literally just.
It came from somewhere, right? And it's
It's
started
a bit
being used. It became
it's a bit like saying
fashionable.
like or something. Now,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yeah. Basically is in there as well.
Basically, like, literally.
It's basically like saying. It's literally like saying basically. What? So confused.
We digress. Is there anything anybody else would like to add on the subject of, let's call it, linguistic ambiguity, or around bi-monthly and fortnightly?
Can I put one little plug for a poem? I linked to it from the sketch I have about homonyms and homographs and homophones and heteronyms, all these different types. And somebody, when I posted that, somebody sent me this poem called "The Chaos" by Gerard Nolst Trinite, and it's an 800-word poem, and it basically highlights all of the ridiculous pronunciations in English.
There you go.
So I like if I try and just give you one verse, which is like, I will keep you, Susie, busy, make your head with heat grow dizzy, tear in eye, your dress you'll tear, queer fair seer, hear my prayer. And so all of these ones where you've got like Susie and busy, it's USY and a letter, but one of them you pronounce Susie and one of them you pronounce busy.
Busy.
Tear in eye and you'll tear a dress, but it's TEAR, and head and heat is HEA, but one is hair and one is he.
Yeah.
And so like the whole poem is like just the craziness of English and all the different ways that you can say these words. And you look at a word and you're like, what, horse and worse. You know, like, how are you supposed to know how to pronounce any of this stuff? You just have to learn everything. Yeah, so it's amazing. So if you look up the chaos as a poem, you'll find it.
That's nice. Can I ask a question? You know
I think
the
you
letter. Hang on. Do you know the letter that comes after G before I? How do you pronounce that?
H.
Tommy?
H.
Is there a
I
wrong?
don't use H, but
Right, so H. Some people say H. Is there a right or wrong with that, or am I just a pedant for asking this question? I'm not trying to prove any wrong. In my view, I think either works absolutely fine.
hello or hippo, like it's.
Well, in that sense,
So
that sense, if we all say H instead of H, wouldn't we say Ello and Ippo?
So at school, I was very fortunate in that I had extra English for my dyslexia. And what we would do effectively is we'd go through the different sounds that each of the letters could make. So A, for example, there are at least 7 different ways that A can be said, like talk, bay and hey, obviously, but talk and ant. And, there's all these different ways that an A can sound, and that's just the first letter of the alphabet. The vowels have a huge number. But as you say, hippo and hello, and, it's just flipping confusing. And you just have to just learn them. And often, eventually, they sound right.
Do you know what's a bad sea to swim in?
Hepatitis C.
Yes.
All right, so to summarise then, within the specifics of this week's sketch, are we saying that for absolute clarity, we should avoid using words like bi-weekly, bi-monthly or biannually? And that if you'd like something to be done every 2 weeks, you should say fortnightly or spell it out once every 2 weeks. Or if it's twice a year, you should say that, exactly that. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, or every second
Bi-weekly.
month. Somebody said you could maybe use semi-weekly.
Is that twice a week? Yeah.
Well, yeah. Oh, yeah. It doesn't sound like 2, does it?
Semi-half. Yeah, half weekly. Yeah, it's just...
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I
let's
think you
ban
should leave
these
them
words.
behind. Yeah.
I mean, from my perspective, I'd like to make it quite clear that I'm quite a big fan of these opportunities for ambiguity sparked into our language. I think it makes it a bit more fun, doesn't it? As we've talked about.
When you get too many vegetables.
Yeah. Yeah.
You could just say, when would you like your vegetables? Later. We'll bring your vegetables later.
No, later than that.
Yeah.
I mean, we had a lot of great soup. It was a good week for soup.
Made lemonade.
Yeah, exactly.
Made soup.
Thanks for rounding that up, Jono. Thanks for picking up on that. I appreciate that. Great. Listen, thank you very much, chaps. Another very fun topic on language. If you've enjoyed this conversation, you might enjoy episode 14 from series 1, which was a bumper pack episode on all sorts of stuff to do with words and language. And Jono's done loads of sketches on this kind of thing, as we've talked about in this episode. I'll put links to all of those sketches that we referenced in the podcast episode description down below. And there'll undoubtedly be more episodes like this in the future. We'd love to know what you think of language ambiguity, and if you've ever fallen foul of it, send us your emails to hello@sketchplanations.com, or you can leave us messages on social media. But before we round off this episode, I'd just like to reiterate once again that the next fresh podcast to drop in your feed after this one will be in 2 weeks' time. So as mentioned at the top of the pod, we're going fortnightly, so we can continue to guarantee the quality for the pod. #podqual. So one last time for absolute clarity, this podcast is now going bi-weekly. What? We'll see you then. Thanks very much for listening. Go well, stay well. Goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone.
All music on this podcast series is sourced from the very talented Frank Cinelli. And you can find loads more tracks at frankcinelli.com.